Good evening, and welcome to Alan's Italy. Um, this is the first show I've had in about 3 weeks. I've been away in Italy, and it was a pretty extraordinary trip. Um, there's a tendency to going on a trip that's really a wonderful trip, and then coming back and saying, "Oh my God, that was the best trip I ever took." So I'm trying to refrain from that a little bit, but I do want to spend a few minutes before we get into tonight's show talking about why this was really something very, very interesting. We got a chance to go to some really wonderful places, many places that we've been already, many places that we haven't been already. We spent 3 days in Orvieto, which is in Umbria, where we visited friends and went to some places to which we haven't been yet. So that was fun. And then we drove back into Tuscany, and my friend Luca took us to a really incredible area. Uh, we went out to Pisa, to the western part of Tuscany, and then we spent a week in Florence before we then headed on to Rome for the final part of our trip. But and that was great. That's always great. And it was great visiting with our friends, and our friends. Three out of the four sets of friends that we visited are native Italians, so they give you kind of a view of Italy that you don't really get to see. So, for example, Luca took us to a really wonderful area of eastern Tuscany that was quite amazing. That I actually gave him the idea for this, and and then we went to, in Orvieto, there's a road that leads out of Orvieto that we didn't know about. That's the ancient road. And a friend of ours who lives in Orvieto showed us that road, so that was pretty amazing. So those were wonderful things with the friends and the sights and all. But another interesting thing happened, which I kind of want to mention to you, and that is that, I mentioned to people that about Alan's Italy, and just mentioning that I have a show on cable access, local cable access, uh, made people really perk up their ears. And I had kind of a lot of very, very positive response to that. And I was able to do a lot of videos with people, interviews with people, and for example, just to give you a couple of the examples that we experienced, we have interviews with hotel owners, one of which was the hotel in Pisa, which was a very, very famous hotel that went back hundreds of years. It's called the Hotel Royal Victoria, and I'll talk about that on a future show. I don't want to say too much because some of the things that the owner of that hotel told us were really extraordinary, amazing things. We had a food demonstration from a place that we've gone to for many, many years, a restaurant in Florence by the name of La Spada that my friend Lydia knows extremely well. She introduced us to the owner, and the owner gave us a very nice interview. And then he was so thrilled by the interview that at the end of the interview, he said, "Come back tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to give you a demonstration of me cooking a three-course meal for you." And this was really, we came back, and we had this unbelievable demonstration of him cooking. And he spoke English very, very well. I mean, it was, it's a broken English, and it might be difficult for some of you to understand some of the words. It was difficult for us, but that was a really wonderful moment. I also got a chance to interview a couple of other hotel owners and people who worked at the hotels about their experiences working in Italy and living in Italy. And it was really, that was what made it really very, very special. We met a couple of college professors who work at the University of Dayton in Ohio, who had brought a group of college students to Florence to study about Florence for an entire month. And I addressed them and I spoke to them a little about Woodstock, and and I can't say they were interested. They were 20-year-olds who were not really, they couldn't relate to Woodstock. And when I mentioned, that Levon Helm had just passed away, they just looked at me like, who's Levon Helm? But you know, it was a very interesting experience. We made a lot of very fine connections with really down to earth people who were doing extraordinary things in Italy. The result for you, my viewing audience, is that over the next year, I have some really amazing shows with some amazing topics and some amazing people for you to meet. And I'm very, very excited about that. When I left uh, this area 3 weeks ago, I had about 15 shows lined up. And my idea was to go there to Italy and come back with a lot more shows. And I was overwhelmed by really how much I was able to accomplish. And we have all of them at home. And my goal in the next 6 to 8 months will be to try to organize these into a way that will be, you know, very easily presentable to you and enjoyable to you. So I hope that that comes off. I must tell you that I am happy to be home. Uh, you know, I kept mentioning to people in Italy that I love coming to Italy. And, you know, this was my 20th trip, which makes me an extremely privileged, lucky person to have this opportunity. But I'm always happy to be home. And here I am, and thank you for welcoming me into your homes once again, as today we do our 21st show. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the topic for tonight's show. And this is a show that I've always wanted to do, and I haven't had much of a chance to do it. You know, it's difficult doing these shows because you have to organize all these pictures and put stuff together. And this particular show is a combination of two trips that Laura and I took, first in 2007 and then again in 2009. In 2007, we took a trip which began in Austria, in Vienna, and we we took a train from Vienna to Salzburg and then rented a car in Salzburg, drove south into Italy through the Alps, through a place called the Brenner Pass, which you'll see in a few minutes, and then we went to Bolzano and into the Dolomites. The Dolomites are the mountains to the north, in the northern part of Italy, but south of the Alps. It's kind of like the Italian part of the Alps, really just below what's known as the Austrian Alps. And that was that trip. And then in 2009, we did kind of the reverse trip. We started in the south in Venice and drove north and then west. And we drove again through the Dolomites to some pretty amazing places with incredibly beautiful scenery, winding up on Lake Como. So what I'm going to focus on tonight will be a combination of those two trips. So as if somebody had come to me and said, Alan, plan a trip to just the Dolomites. And we like to spend, let's say, a week or 2 weeks here. And that's the trip that I've kind of created for people to take a look at. This first picture is one of the valleys high up in the Dolomites. And let's first take a look at the map of Italy just to pinpoint exactly where we will be looking tonight. We'll be beginning our trip in Venice, and you know by now that Venice is on the very eastern coast, northeastern coast of Italy, right on the Adriatic Sea, and that's where we're going to start the tour, and we're going to head north and then west. And this is the more detailed map of that. This is one of my makeshift maps, starting with an actual map that I got from one of the maps I have, and you could see the route that I'm going to be taking. It's a little, busy on the map and hard to see what everything is, but you could see in the lower right-hand corner is Venice. So the first thing you're going to see will be a photo of Venice, and then moving north to the town of Belluno, which we kind of go around but not really spend time at, and then we head west through what's known as the Lower Dolomites, through the town of Pergine and Trento, and then head north to Bolzano. When we're in Pergine, we found a castle that we stayed at, and that was a very interesting experience, which I'll tell you about. And we wound up spending 2 nights in Bolzano, And while we were in Bolzano, we took side trips. So that was a very nice location to get around to other places, namely to the north, the Reiferstein Castle, which is a very interesting place to go, and to the east, something called the Great Dolomite Road, which is the road, the definitive way of traveling along the upper part of the Dolomites with some extraordinary views. Some people go as far as here's Bolzano, and we went actually up a little bit and then around and then coming back in this little semicircle. But a lot of people go all the way out here to the town of Cortina d'Ampezzo. We didn't do that. We stopped at Canazai, and we'll talk about that a little later. Then we came back to Bolzano, where we stayed at a really wonderful hotel, which I have pictures of. And then probably three of the great museums I've ever seen, and this is one of them. And this is, I'll tell you about it in a little while. And then we get back on the road and we head to the west, going through the Dolomites, going through a place called the Tonali Pass, and then coming right down here and winding up on Lake Como, where in 2009 we continued our vacation in Varenna on Lake Como. So, we start the tour in Venice, and please forgive me because the extraordinarily intense pollen that we have up here in Woodstock at the current time is making it very difficult for me to talk, so I'm going to do the best I can and occasionally drink more than I usually do, and maybe even suck on a little sucking candy I have here. So we're going to start in Venice, and the first thing we do is rent a car. Okay, now renting a car, as I've mentioned to you on other shows, is not an easy thing to do, especially for me, who's pretty nervous about this stuff. But the place you rent a car in Venice is a place called the Piazzale Roma, which is so un-Venice-like that it's really amazing. You look at this, look at that. You know, if I were to show you pictures of Venice, this is not the place I would show you. But I just wanted to show you where we started our tour. Right in the middle of that screen there, in that large modern building that you see right in the front, and slightly above that truck over there in the middle of the picture, is where we picked up the car at Europcar. We then started outside of Venice, following a route that I had practiced in my mind for weeks before to make sure I didn't make a mistake. This is before we had a GPS. And immediately as I pulled out of Venice, I made a wrong turn. But eventually, we got up into the road that leads to the Dolomites. And you could see that very quickly along that road, you come to some really, really extraordinary scenery. This is just a glimpse of what you will be seeing in the next few minutes. We are now driving north to Belluno. And this is what it looks like. You know, there are pull-offs where you could really get a view of what everything looks like. But for us, you know, with Laura taking the pictures, this is, you know, riding in the car, you got some really wonderful views. So you didn't have to really stray very much from the main road. And this is what it looks like heading north to the town of Belluno, and then taking a bit of a western turn, heading to the town of Pergine. And this is the road we eventually took, which is a side road and a very scary road, as you could see. Number one, it's narrow. Number two, there are no guardrails whatsoever. This scares the hell out of me when I ride on a road like this, because, you know, you take your mind off for 1 minute and you never know where you might be. And you wind up very high above a very, very large town. I was surprised at how large this town was. This is the town of Pergine, Pergine. And high above that town is the castle that guards over the town. This is the Castello Pergine, which is a 13th century castle. And this castle was built by the Austrians, and then it was, you know, changed hands many times during the Middle Ages. But this is a town, this is a castle that has been restored many, many times, as you might imagine, from the 13th century. And this castle, I picked this castle for two reasons. One is because of its location. It's perched very high into the Dolomites, and you can see that it's in a really beautiful location. And you'll see some beautiful pictures in a moment. But the other reason that I like this castle is because it was supposed to be spooked with ghosts. And I've always been very interested in that, believe it or not. Um, and the prospect of walking in the hallways in the middle of the night doesn't scare me so much as I just like to bump into a ghost once in a while. So I thought that, you know, I mean, I don't believe in that, but I thought that this would be a very eerie and exciting place to spend the evening. So we spent the evening here, and here's a few pictures of the castle grounds. It was very, very beautiful. And really, our intention was to not only visit the castle, but to then go into the nearby town of Trento, which is a really beautiful town and very historical, but we never got out of the castle because we spent the entire day simply relaxing on the grounds and taking beautiful pictures. And you could see why we were intrigued by this, because it is really a beautiful place to be with spectacular views. From everywhere in the castle, you got these spectacular views of the Dolomites. Look, this is one of my favorites, really. So we were on one of the ramparts. Looking to the left is the castle, and to the right is the view of it. Look at this view we had from the top of the castle, looking actually away from the town of Pergine now. So we're looking to the east now from the way we came, and you can see some really beautiful mountains all around us, surrounding. There was a modern art exhibition that was going on at the time. This is a very interesting part of Italy, is that it's a dichotomy. You know, you get these 13th and 11th century castles, and they have these exhibitions. So you get modern sculpture all over the place amid the ancient ruins. Ancient and medieval ruins, I should say. Here's another view looking at one of the castle, over the castle walls, at the town of Pergine in the background with the Dolomites there. Here's another view of the town, which we really didn't get into very much except on the way out. Some more views. Okay, I'm showing you this not because I want you to, look at me, but I want you to look at the door behind me. This is an 11th century door. And, Laura loves doors, as you well know. And there's a picture of us at the top of the ramparts, this time looking out towards Pergine. And I believe that Laura took this picture herself, believe it or not. We couldn't get anybody up there to do this, so she held her arm out and did this picture. And there's the picture of the castle, perched very high into the mountains. Our room was on the second floor, I believe. And I must say, unfortunately, there were no ghosts. Although I went out there in the middle of the night, and it was, it's a hotel. The outside is amazing. The inside is a hotel. We did lie on a bed, which they said was from the 13th century. But then we realized that it was a modern bed that was just, kind of a reproduction of a bed. But the castle itself is very fascinating, with wonderful views of the Dolomites. That's the door, finally, that Laura got without me standing in front of it. One last view, I believe. Oh, there's another one. These were the grounds, so we spent a lot of time there. Now we're on the road again, and we're headed towards Trento, and then to the Autostrada, which would then take us north to Bolzano, and that's what we're doing now. We're heading north. That's Trento over there on the bottom, and into the lower Alps, known as the Dolomites, through some spectacular views, and we are now headed north towards Bolzano. A lot of farmland. Little towns. Okay, there's Trento. Actually, that's what Trento looks like. As we skirted it, did not go in, and just kept going north through spectacular scenery. There's a picture of the car we had. The first time, I think, in Italy that I've ever actually rented a Volkswagen. More spectacular mountain views. Even when it's overcast, the views are just spectacular. And we're rising very high now. We're going high into the Dolomites. I believe Bolzano, see, this is one of the, I left my notes home, so I think Bolzano is about 3,000 feet up. Not, it's not very high. And we're approaching Bolzano now. There's some signs in the distance, and I think one, oh no, this is the, oh, you know what this, yeah, this is the road to Bolzano. And you can see that the higher we get, the more you get snow in the mountains. And again, as I said before, you don't have to really get out of the car. And you get occasional scenes of farms, farm animals, which we took along the way. Most of the roads were very, very good. There's a snow-covered mountain in the back, continuing along the road to Bolzano. Okay, now what we did in this particular case was we skirted the town of Bolzano temporarily because I had read about the fact that there was a castle north of Bolzano by maybe 15 miles, which seemed very reasonable. So on our way to Bolzano, we decided to take a brief interlude and go to this castle. This is called the Reiferstein Castle, which was a castle that I believe was from the 8th century and then was refurbished in the 11th century. And you can see this is really beautiful. This is from a distance. This is a little more of a distance coming up the hill towards the castle. And this is the view as we were going up the hill that took us to the Reiferstein Castle. And this was the castle entrance. So, somebody comes out and they open this gate and you kind of come in that direction. You park at the base of the hill, and then this is the gate that you walk through on foot to get through the castle. That's me over there on the side, and Laura's taking this picture for the simple reason that I was in a very, very bad mood. We had gotten to the top of the castle, and then I had told Laura that I think I left my sunglasses in the car, or my car on, or something like that. And I went down the mountain. And when I got down the mountain, it was such a hard trek going up that I asked somebody there if they knew a shortcut, and they said, "Follow us." I followed them and wound up in a location that I had no idea where I was, so I was lost. And Laura's wondering where I am, and I got really frightened. And eventually I found my way to the castle, but I was not in a good mood. And that's what it looks like. Alan, 5 minutes after he was just thought that he'd be lost forever, finally getting back into the swing of things. And here are some pictures from the castle. Very beautiful. This could be a video. Let me try this. Let's see how the sound is on this. We are in the Reiferstein Castle, which is about 10 miles south of the Brenner Pass, separating Austria and Italy. Cut the sound and I'll just narrate. Okay, so this is what the castle looks like, and we are waiting for a tour we're about to get. Any minute, we're going to be receiving a tour. But this is exactly what this castle looked like in the 11th century. So it was pretty amazing. And we're walking up the stairs now where our tour guide is about to give us a tour. Actually, Laura's coming up, and I'm already there. And let me, at this point, stop it and go to the next picture. Okay, so this is what the castle looked like in the 11th century and still does. So it's really quite amazing. There's Laura sitting on that window, so, looking out at that view, which is quite amazing. Another view of the outside of the castle. Okay, now I purposely photographed this young woman. This young woman is an extraordinary woman. She's known as Frau Steiner, and I don't know much about her except for one thing. She is the hardest working young lady I've ever seen. There were about 20 people, and she first gave a tour of the castle in German. Then she gave a tour of the castle in Italian, and then called us over, and just for us, Laura, and for me, she gave the tour of the castle in English. So this is a woman who gave the same tour 3 times in 3 different languages, and looked, very, very nice person. Most of northern Italy, especially in the Dolomites, close to the Austrian border, is partly German. There's a tremendous German influence, as you'll see when we get to the pictures of the town of Bolzano. But this is some of the views from the castle and the surrounding area. This is, again, you can cut the sound on this, and I'll just. This is. We then went. This is the trip we took when we were in Vienna, going south, and we're going south now through the area known as the Brenner Pass, which is was a very famous route for bringing goods and services first from Austria to Italy, and then later, unfortunately, used by the Nazis when they were marching into Italy. And this is a beautiful, beautiful area, very high in the mountains, connecting Austria and Italy. And this whole region was really very much in dispute between Italy and Austria over the years. And this is the town of Bolzano, which is about 20 to 30 miles south of the Austrian-Italian border. And you could see from this town that it does not look like a typical Italian town as you have been seeing over the course of the past several months. When we go into Italian towns, they have a very distinctive look. This does not look like an Italian town at all. It's more of a German or a Swiss town. And one of the reasons we came to Bolzano is because of one of the most extraordinary museums in all of Italy. And I would have to go as far as to say, and I've been to, the museums in Vienna. I've been in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and the Louvre in Paris, and the National Gallery, and the British Museum in London, and the Prado in Madrid, and of course the museums in Italy. And this is one of my favorite. It is called the South Tyrol Museum of Archeology. This area of Italy is known as the South Tyrol area. This is a museum that was built for one purpose and one purpose only. In the year 1993, let me just take a sip for a moment. In the year 1993, a bunch of German tourists were hiking in the northern Dolomites just below the border of Austria. And they came upon something sticking out of the ice. And they came to them, after a little bit of digging, they came to the conclusion that they may have stumbled upon a great archaeological site. And they brought archaeologists immediately to take a look from Innsbruck, because they thought they were, they were pretty much in Austria. They thought they were in Austria. So archaeologists came from Innsbruck, which is right kind of on the border of Austria and Italy, and they came to the conclusion that the person that was hidden in the ice was a man who had lived 5,300 years ago, in the year 3300 BC, and who was buried in the ice, fully clothed at the time, with all of the implements that he had carried with him on the day he died in the year 3300 BC. And they created an entire museum just for him. And this is a recreation of what the fellow looked like based on all of the information that was gathered by the archaeologist who was studying this. Now, on the positive side, this is an amazing archaeological find because this is a person who was fully mummified from the ice for 5,300 years. And this is the oldest person that has ever been found fully intact. And there is a picture of him he is actually in the museum in a spot where he's kept under a certain amount of temperature and humidity. I think it was 0 degrees temperature and at a very high humidity, because the idea was to keep the body moist. And this is called Otzei. And this is gentleman they gave the name of Otzei because he was found in an area of the Dolomites known as Otzei. The Austrians immediately brought him back to Innsbruck, where they studied him for the next several years. Meanwhile, the Italians got wind of it and found out that the area that he was actually found was not Austrian property, but was Italian property. So a lawsuit ensued for the next several years in which the Austrians were fighting the Italians on who should get possession of this incredible archaeological find. And it turned out that the Italians proved that he was found on Italian territory, and therefore they built a museum in the town of Bolzano, which is the last major Italian city before you go into Austria. And this is where a museum was built, and Otzei is the star of this museum. This is a close-up of what he would have looked like. Now, I was very reluctant to show you the picture of what he looks like now because it's rather grotesque, to tell you the truth. And one of the things I don't like doing on this show, as I told you once before, is showing things that might be disturbing to my viewing audience, in case children are watching or people who are disturbed by these sites. So I'll tell you what to do if you're really interested in this right after I do a little brief explanation of who Otzei was. This was a fellow who apparently was 5 feet 5 inches tall, 110 pounds, 45 years of age, in very, very good physical condition. Now, they did all kinds of tests on him, and they came to the conclusion that they knew what he ate before he died 5,300 years ago. He had eaten a deer with some roots, and I believe that there was parts of an ibex, which was an ancient animal that existed at the time. They came to the conclusion that he was with 2 companions of his who were attacked by attacked by an enemy group. He's from further north in Italy, but he had ventured south in order to raid a camp of some enemies of theirs, and they were involved in this battle that took place. 2 of his comrades were injured. They came up with this, one of whom he carried on his back, and they have the blood stains from the person he was carrying on his back, so they were able to determine that. He himself was engaged in some kind of a battle with these other people. He killed 2 of them because extraneous blood, not from his companions or from himself, but from 2 other people, were on his clothing, coming to the conclusion to the archaeologists that he was indeed in a battle of some sort in which he lost the battle, because there is a wound mark in his left shoulder of an arrow which had been broken off by him. Apparently he was shot, fell down, was bleeding profusely, and managed to break the arrow off and remove part of the arrow from his shoulder. But then he became weakened by loss of blood and eventually died from the intense cold temperatures. And there he was buried for 5,300 years. And really, the only benefit of global warming, I suppose, is that a lot of the ice in that area is melting. And Otzei's immediate, grave was melted, and he wound up being discovered. And this is what they say that he looked like, which was pretty good for the times. at the age of 45. And he was, these are all the things he wore. Those were his arrows and his boots, which I read yesterday were very sophisticatedly made. They were waterproof, and he was very warm. He has his axe there in his hand, and if you really want to read, there's a lot of material on him. And if you're really interested in reading it, just Google Otzei, Otzei, and you'll get a tremendous amount of material on this amazing person. These are a close-up of two of his arrows that were used, and he was shot and eventually took the arrow out, as I indicated, and reused the arrow. So these people were pretty resourceful. And that museum, which we were at for about an hour and a half at the very end of the day in Bolzano, was one of the really wonderful experiences that we had on this entire trip, and really in the entire time that I've been traveling to Italy. This is the main piazza in Bolzano, known as the Piazza Walter. And it was a huge piazza with a beautiful church and many cafes and beautiful scenery. This is a video that I don't have much time for, but doesn't give you very much more. Well, let me do it briefly. Again, no sound on this, Ellen. This is a 360-degree view of the Piazza Walter, which we found to be a very, very pleasant piazza, surrounded by very pretty houses, a couple of statues, and these very, very wonderful cafes along the side. And we had a lot of fun there over the time that we were in Bolzano. Okay, so we're now back to the beginning. And this is some scenes from what the town looks like. One of the great things about going to Bolzano is they have a ski lift, a cable car, that brings you up to the top. And I just, I'm a little afraid of heights, so I didn't do that. But these are some views from the town of Bolzano. While I rest my voice for a moment, I'll just kind of go through these for you. Notice the German influence. This does not look like an Italian town in the least. Okay, this was pretty amazing. I had another video here, but I don't know if we're going to get to it because we're sort of running through the time pretty quickly. This was one of the most beautiful hotels I've ever been to in my life. This is the Hotel Park Lauren in Bolzano. Let me try to do as much of this video as I can. So again, no sound. This is what it looks like going through the door. I don't like to show videos of hotels, but in this case, it was probably one of the most beautiful hotels. It wasn't really that expensive because it's like not exactly in Venice or Rome or Florence. It's kind of in an out-of-the-way place. But here is a little video that we took going into the bar. This was probably the most beautiful bar I've ever been in my life. And all we had in this bar was a little cappuccino, which we had on the piazza, right on the terrace rather, right outside the bar. But everybody came here at night and just spent the entire night just listening to the piano music and having a glass of wine or a cappuccino. We sat right on that terrace and had some cappuccino the night before. And I wish to show you here the gardens, which were very beautiful. I'm going to keep an eye on the clock so I could then move along. And this is what the hotel is really known for. It's known for these beautiful gardens, an outdoor section for eating meals. There's actually a swimming pool. I don't know if we have a picture of that, but I was too exhausted to go swimming. But these beautiful outdoor chairs where you could just kind of sit and relax in the evening. A little playground for children. Some more modern sculpture. There's a swimming pool in the background, which I just could not get into at all. You know, and you sort of Bolzano was a real metropolis kind of town, real, you know, kind of a little urban looking, and you know, you come here and it's like a paradise away from that. Look at these gardens, just beautiful walking around here and spending time. Some more modern sculpture in the background there. Little trestles with surrounded by plants and leaves. Okay, and I have to really move on. That gives you an idea as to this beautiful garden. And let me move on. Excuse me. There's some more views, some still pictures of what some of these gardens look like. And, you know, and amid every so often you have a nice bench where you could sit and relax. So this hotel is really known mostly for this. And remember these beautiful gardens on Lake Como and Lake Maggiore. And this was a very beautiful place to stay. And now what we're going to do is take a trip along the Great Dolomite Road. Now many people who like to see the Dolomites take this road. This is the definitive trip along through the Dolomites. And this is what it looks like driving to the east, starting in Bolzano and headed towards the town of Canazei in the Dolomites. And the next several pictures will be pictures of the Dolomites from heights of anywhere from 9,000 to 11,000 feet up. And this was mid-June, and you could still see that there's quite a bit of snow in this region. See the low-lying clouds? So this is what the Dolomites looks like. This is not quite the 11,000 because the 11,000 was the highest point in the Dolomites, an area known as Marmolada. And there's Laura and I, pretty high up, again about around 9,000 feet. And this is what it looks like being in the very highest points of the Dolomites. I always like this picture because you get the clouds and the mountains in the background. Look at that picture, one of my favorites. We eventually wound up in the town of Canazei, which is really a skiing town, and not very pretty. Just, you know, it has that, you know, chalet kind of a look, and it wasn't really our cup of tea in terms of Italian towns, but India kind of interesting. It was dead. I mean, there was nothing going on. We took a fast picture. We liked this picture. This is a picture of the route we took. We took the route. I'm pointing to the town of Canazei. We had actually come from the north, heading down the mountain quite a bit, so we're much lower now than we were a little higher. And then serendipitously, we came upon Lago di Carezza. We saw a bunch of cars parked on the side of the road. We stopped, and this is what we saw, and this was pretty amazing. This is a lake that is crystal clear, and that green, beautiful turquoise color that you see in the lake is from the surrounding fir trees that reflected itself in the crystal clear water of Lake Carezza, which is midway between Canazei and Bolzano. In other words, west of Canazei, east of Bolzano. And look at that lake. We just spent like about an hour here just photographing this incredible lake with incredibly beautiful water. Laura did several paintings of this when she got home. So inspired was she by this. These are natural springs whose water reflected the color of the surrounding trees. And this is the way back to Bolzano now. Again, going through the high points of the Dolomites. And now I have to sort of move because it's getting close to the end, but I'll just move along. More pictures of the Dolomites. And now we're headed west from Bolzano, headed towards Lake Como. So this is the road we took, headed towards the west, with the beautiful valleys and towns nestled within the valleys. Beautiful mountain views. Little churches. All of a sudden, this is a beautiful picture. This is also one of my favorites, with the church in the background. Little towns at the very foot of these mountains, with the roads going right past. That sort of looks like a vineyard, which sort of surprises me. Another town. Not sure of what these towns were, but I think we're entering now an area known as the Tonali Pass. And we went through this town, and on the other side of the town, I believe, was the Tonali, there it is, the Tonali Pass is the pass that takes you through this part of the mountains. Be careful. And there we go, headed west towards Lake Como. And these are all skiing towns. And in fact, there's a picture of a condominium development that was built on the left side of the road, which I don't know if we have that, but it became very built up based on the skiing that takes place in this area during the winter. So these are winter areas, but of course they're very, very beautiful as well during the summer. Just about getting very close now to Lake Como. The roads are, as you can see, very good roads with side rails. There's a chalet, which, has quite a few cars there, which surprised us because this is really a skiing resort. More mountains to the background. Heading now into Italy, I believe. Those are starting to appear to me to be Italian dwellings. Beautiful bridge across the road. And I could tell that we're getting very close to Lake Como. There's Lake Como. This is the very northern point of Lake Como. Just as you make the turn south, going from Switzerland into Italy. There is Varenna on Lake Como, which I showed you. I'm just showing you one picture of because we did an entire show on Lake Como earlier in the year. But that's where we wound up, and we then spent the next 4 or 5 days on Lake Como. And now, of course, back to the Dolomites. And that brings us pretty much to the end of the show. I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Again, it's a pleasure to be back, and I hope in the next few weeks we'll be showing you some really wonderful things. So on behalf of Ellen and myself, buona notte e buona fortuna.